8 weeks behind us. Let's turn our attention to week 9 for Dynasty. Let's talk 5 moves to make. Before we get immediately into it, yes, I'm not over the Bears loss. That's the worst thing I've ever seen. And also, there will not be a 5 moves to make video. Week 10 and week 11, I am gone for 2 weeks on my honeymoon. So maybe Addison picks it up. I will not be here. So this will have to hold us over until week 12. So with that being said, move number 1. We are going out and we are adding all Houston pass catchers. If you did not see the news, they fear Stefon Diggs has torn his ACL on a non-contact injury coming out of week 8. And that means now, right, Tank Dell is the unquestioned number 1 for at least another week, potentially week 10 when Nico Collins comes back. That will shift. But for now, it's Tank Dell. And then it is some mixture of Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie, and Robert Woods. All 3 of them have to be rostered. We're in bye weeks. Injuries are a disaster across the league, across fantasy. That means you're scrambling. You are reaching down the barrel, trying to find any kind of production. I mean, I was starting Jalen McMillan in multiple leagues this week. Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie, to a lesser extent Robert Woods. All of them are going to be semi-fantasy relevant. Trying to guess which one is the actual beneficiary is going to be tough. I don't think any of them are necessarily great. If I had to make a bet, I'll go with John Mechie. I'll chase the draft capital and just see if he can revive his career over the next couple of weeks without Stefon Diggs in Houston. Now, move number 2 is a repeat of, I think it's week 1 or week 2. We're going back and we're re-adding Malik Willis. Jordan Love left with a knee injury. It doesn't seem, they don't think it's going to be a long-term injury, but he might miss 1 or 2 games here. So if that's the case, I am adding Malik Willis. He looked fine as a starter, in those 2 spot starts he had. And the reason is, look, Matt LaFleur coaches an insane offense. It does not matter right now who is back there. This offense is going to produce, and it's going to produce for fantasy specifically. With Malik Willis in his 2 starts, he had 12 points, which is fine, 25 points in his second start. Now, I will caveat this, right? If you are adding Malik Willis, there is upside. But, 1, week 10 is a bye week. So that might not matter, right? Jordan Love could be back in week 11. But week 9, they play Detroit. Now, I don't know if you really want to trust Malik Willis in that spot. He has QB2 upside. The rushing is there. But Detroit could just eat them alive. So he's a risky play, right? You may add him just to have the depth, but he is a risky start if you're that desperate. So move number 3, I'm looking to sell off all of these rental running backs that have found value this season. If I'm a contender, I'm probably holding, but specifically if I'm on the fringe or if I am rebuilding, I want guys like J.K. Dobbins, Kareem Hunt, Raheem Mostert, James Conner, Alexander Madison. Go down the list. You know the players. This is like the peak time to move these guys. 1, they are healthy. For a lot of these players, that's not a guarantee the rest of the season at all. 2, several other running backs around the leagues are injured. We're in bye week season. And a lot of these handcuff running backs or rental running backs have looked really damn good. So I'm looking for a 2nd and a 3rd for all of these players. In my own leagues, I have traded J.K. Dobbins for a 2nd and a 3rd on a rebuilding roster. I have traded James Conner for 2 seconds. These are things that you can do to help your rebuilds along. They have peak value right now. The closer you get to the end of the season, the less important they're going to be because 1, they're either going to get hurt, or 2, in the case of like Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco might come back. All of those guys and many more probably should be, viewed as 1-year rentals. Maybe J.K. Dobbins can stretch it a little bit, and we'll talk about that in a separate video this week. But I want all of them off my roster if I'm not immediately going for a title right now. And for move number 4, on the flip side, I'm buying Chris Olave. Chris Olave has not had a good year. Let's just put that out there. It has been a rough go of it. Coming into this week, into week 8, he had a 17% target share. That is the worst mark of his career, or would be the worst mark of his career by a wide margin, right? The first 2 seasons, Chris Olave was well over 20%, put up 1,000 plus yards, put up 1,100 plus last season, and looked like he was on his way to maybe not being, a true top 5 wide receiver, but top 12, like that was a very realistic range of outcomes. He's had a tough go of it. He's left games early. He's been injured. All of this is factoring into what we've seen with Chris Olave. And I think Rashid Shaheed being much better than people anticipated is another huge piece of this, right? Rashid Shaheed looked like the number one in this offense when he was healthy. And in Chris Olave's first game without Rashid Shaheed, pulls in 14 targets and a 33% target share. It's going to get better for Chris Olave. And the cherry on top is Derek Carr has not been in for most of the season. He should be coming back in the next 2 weeks. That's the expectation right now in the media. Things are going to get better for Chris Olave. His value is going to rebound by the end of the season because quarterback play is going to improve. His volume should improve because you took away a huge piece of the offense. So even if you buy him with the intention of saying in the offseason, I'm gonna get out, I think that's fine because he just feels like a stock that is almost guaranteed to rise if you just want to play this like the stock market. So I like Chris Olave. I'm giving up a late first plus for the guy. I mean, you can give up maybe a guy like Cedric Tillman and an additional pick, it would have to be a first, and capitalize on some of the hype there. There are lots of ways you can go about acquiring Chris Olave, and honestly, as long as it doesn't cost me an early first, I'm probably going to make the deal. And our last move number 5, I've kind of talked about this throughout the video already, but you need to make a decision. Are you a legitimate contending roster, or are you a rebuilder? And yes, I understand there's like somewhere in the middle that you could live, but look, if you're not a legit contender, you're probably in some version of rebuild. So if you are a fringe playoff team or you're, sitting in the 7th seed and you're on the outside looking in, do not hope things break your way unless you're first in points for and just had bad luck against you. If you are a true fringe playoff team, you should be selling veterans right now. Go get ahead of the curve because look, as these teams start to sort of weed themselves out, right? The further you get along, people will realize they have less of a chance of winning. That means your target pool gets smaller. The number of teams that have needs gets smaller. You need to be ahead of the curve in that. I like to be ahead of the curve really around week 7. Week 8 is when I think is the sweet spot. Teams should know if they're legit or not. If you're questioning that, sell. That running back move number 3, that applies to you. Right, I would target a guy like Chris Olave. He's somebody I think as a rebuilder, I'm still fine to buy. That makes perfect sense. On the flip side, if you are a legit contender, do you have any roster holes? I think that's a huge piece of this, right? Because if you're saying, I'm a wide receiver down, who can I go and get that's going to make a difference? Yes, there are cheap targets you can get like a Darnell Mooney or a Jacoby Myers. Are they really going to put you over the top in the grand scheme of things? You need to assess your league and the other teams you're going up against. Realistically, maybe a move for Tyreek Hill makes more sense. Go and get not only, arguably one of the best wide receivers, if not the best wide receiver in the NFL, and actually make a statement because he moves the needle. Buying a bunch of fringe guys for cheap, I understand it. I'm going to do a video on it this week, but that's not usually my preferred move. If I'm going all in on a title, I'm going as big as I can possibly go, right? So that would be a guy like Tyreek Hill. So these are the things you need to consider. The other piece is going to be, when do you buy running backs? As a rebuilder, I want them off my rosters now. As a contender, I'm basically waiting until my league's trade deadline, if there is one, to buy a running back. The reason is the injury rates are sky high. The chances of trading for J.K. Dobbins and having him be injured by the time you need him in the playoffs, extremely high. The man is seeing almost 20 touches a game, or 20 opportunities a game. James Conner, notorious injury history. Raheem Mostert, notorious injury history. All of these players are just injury prone, and I hate that phrase, but they are. So these are the things you need to consider when you're actually going to make those moves. Splash moves at wide receiver, patience at running back. That is what helps you win a title long term.